This is the Blaze and Access Podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. I'm Blaze Bryant, as we have just a fantastic women's history panel that I'm bringing you today with three of my very dear friends from a phenomenal organization called Lights, Camera, Access, which is all about, in a few words, amongst many, representation in the media for people with disabilities and moving that needle. So joining me, and I'll introduce them individually. I'll start with Terry Hartman Squire, who is the founder of Einsoft Communications and LCA. Terry, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Blaze.
You're very welcome. Also with us is Robin Billups, who runs the Billups Group. Thanks so much for being here, Robin.
Appreciate you the invite.
Of course. And last but certainly not least, Andrea Jennings is the accessibility and entertainment strategist and one of the absolute best. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Blaze.
All right. So I just really want to start this off quickly with each of you, and in the interest of eliminating a jump ball here. Terry, I'll start with you. Where did your passion for media representation in the disability space come from?
Long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, when I was in college, I was working with abused kids and did not want to put them in restraints because they had already been abused. So we were holding this kid down and his foot slipped and kicked me in the jaw, and it sprained the cervical part of my spine. And for a while, I was wearing a neck brace. And I happened, coincidentally, I'm using air quotes because I don't think there's any coincidences, I went on an audition, and the casting director looked at me in this neck brace and shook her head and walked the other way. And at that moment, I didn't know what to do with my anger. I didn't know that it was like a collision course with what privilege I had, which I didn't realize I had, until in an instant, it's gone and somebody makes a judgment about you. So I stormed over to Screen Actors Guild, and Bill Shallert was the president. He played the dad on Patty Duke in Little House on the Prairie. Very sweet guy. And I said, you got committees for women and children and seniors and minorities, and what are you going to do about disability? This is temporary and it's not fair. And he said, I don't know, start a committee. I said, okay. And then I met other like-minded kindred spirits who are also creatives with disabilities, and together, each one having its own origin story of discrimination or barriers or lowered expectations. We worked with SAG and got into the 1980, don't do the math, collective bargaining agreements, accessibility, and disability as one of the protected groups.
Wow.
And then we all started organizing in different ways on both coasts. And now there's so many great organizations that are founded by creators with disabilities that we're going to change and take back the narrative.
Absolutely. Andrea, over to you, and then Robin.
Yeah, how I got involved in the accessibility, I'm off camera, but I'm going to come right back on. This is live, and so something was in my eye, and my eye started tearing. So, but it's okay.
You good?
I'm good now.
All right, because we were joking before we started tape here that Andrea came on and said that her vision was a bit blurry today, and I said, "Well, I've got you beat." So
right.
I stand by that.
Right. There was no reaction because no, for having us here, and I'm just having some watery eye issues. But yeah, I was welcomed into this beautiful community because I was on my way to work one day and I had a car accident. I was at a Fortune 500 company back then. That was pretty big, and really young, and driving, and it was very into, and I became disabled, and I acquired my disability, and I had a spinal cord injury really high up, could have been fatal, and I'm just thanking God that I'm here. But I was really disappointed when I found out that the ADA had been passed as a law, but it wasn't being adhered to. And I just became an advocate right out the door. And I also was wondering, why didn't we have pretty mobility aids? Like, not to be vain, but that's the thing. It's not vain. Like, we get to choose our color of our cars. We get to choose color of everything, but they're just giving us these little metal things. And I was like, oh no, I'm able now to make that. So I and
Uh,
it, more importantly, I believe media shapes a lot of our opinions, and I didn't see enough people who look like me as a Black disabled woman. I didn't see it in disability, and I just really wanted to make a change with that. So that's how I got started.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I hadn't thought about the prettiness of the mobility aids. Maybe that's why the white canes for us blind people are just the way they are.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. How about you, Robin?
Well, Blaze, I was drug into this fighting and screaming and kicking because I'm a very rigid person when it comes to process. So about 25 years ago, I meet this young lady, and I'm not even sure how we met, but we spent 4 hours together the first time we met. And Terry is telling me, Robin, I'm thinking about the fact that, my constituents, I operate in the gig economy. They're running their own business, and I think you can create some workshops to help them get their foundation. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I'm too rigid. I'm very rigid. I'm very dictatorial. And, I've learned my new vocabulary being in this community now. I'm an ableist, right? But I prayed about it. She prayed about it. And I trust her. I trust her. And the scripture says to honor, to take care of the least of them. And when you are a minority, when you're a woman, when you're disabled, when you're a veteran, these are these buckets that we all fall within, and we need advocates. And so I see the work that we do as advocacy work, but I also see it as confidence building. And so that I got drug in. I was kicking and screaming, and I love every minute of it.
That's so interesting. And you're right, it is advocacy work because so often, at least in the space that I work in within independent living and the disability rights space, we think of advocacy as, oh, well, we have to go deal with legislators and try and get these talking heads, frankly, to change their mind on things.
Right.
And that's not the case at all. And it is so important that we all do advocacy. So, Robin, when was that light bulb moment for you? That's like, okay, well, I guess I can not be so rigid and maybe not so dictatorial and
but
be a
wait
part of
Blaze,
this.
who said I'm not so rigid, and who said I'm not so dictatorial? I'm a middle kid. I start out with the fact that I'm a middle kid. I'm going to get my way, and I'm going to want everybody to walk away with a smile on their face.
I'm the middle child of three. I get it too. Yeah.
However, the way I see it is, one, growing up in Missouri, which is just north of the Mason-Dixon line,
Yep.
I've learned how to advocate because I'm about to be 71 years old. So there were a lot of times when I was the only one and treated like the only one, Black female in an environment where, I wasn't necessarily welcomed. And so advocacy is just using your voice, right? So why wouldn't we use our voices and our knowledge and our skill set to help a community that's $18 trillion in spend? Why do we, I believe that inclusion is an action word, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not diversity. Diversity comes when you include everybody, right? So that's yeah, I'm still rigid, you know.
And we love you for it.
I'm still process driven because I think that what we attempt to do is to give our community the tools that they need to be able to take a no and turn that into a maybe and sometimes a yes, because you're being informed, you understand what your options are. And so that's what we're attempting to do.
You're absolutely right. Terry, I was just thinking about, as Robin was answering that question, when I first heard about lights, camera, access, and I was saying to myself, as a totally blind person, lights, the camera, okay. And then, oh, there's access. All right, this is super intriguing. And I was just thinking about the time when I met you down in New York
Right.
City when I had my
Right.
seeing eye dog Flash at the time, my black lab, who's
Yeah.
now enjoying the retired life as a 13-year-old black lab. And coming down and meeting you and Derek and Andrea, I think you were there too, weren't you? I'm trying to, maybe
No,
not.
Andrea wasn't there, but Anna Paquin was there. J.D. Michaels was there. Who was
Yes.
at CBGO at the time. And Emily Ladau was there, and Sean Horn. These are journalists with disabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was our first get-together. You were there right at the beginning.
It was, yeah.
Pre-COVID.
Right.
Pre-COVID.
Right. Or as I'd like to say, BC.
Yes, BC. That's right.
That's a good one. That's a good
That's
one.
right. That is a good one.
Thank you. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and right, and having the opportunity to network, and I was just this sort of young, naive-ish, stupid kid in my 20s. Oh, well,
No,
you
you
think
were a
I know how to
talented
network.
kid. You were very talented, and it showed. And
Well,
you maximized that opportunity.
well,
And that was a great time because we were doing it in person. We were at CUNY and NYU and BBDO and Real Abilities, which was the Manhattan JCC, at the
Yeah.
Obama White House, and Gallaudet University, which is the only university, four-year university for deaf students, and the Computer History Museum, CBS, Television Academy, and in Chicago, the Film Commission.
right.
And it was really great, but the idea and the name came from a collaboration with the Department of Labor, where Hilda Solis was Secretary of Labor, and Kathy Martinez, who is a fierce advocate, who also is blind and headed up the World Institute on Disability. She was the assistant secretary, and they were looking for summits, one-day sector summits, to identify and help build some resolution on the low employment in different sectors. And so we did financial services, healthcare, because people with disabilities are always relegated to the receiving end of the healthcare delivery system.
That's
and
for
they
sure.
really act part of it. And then we did entertainment, and we launched it at the TV Academy with the new diversity committee. And that was 2010. And we did an all-day summit. We had webinars and panels, and it was just really a framing of the state of the unions, literally and figuratively.
Wow.
And realized that for there to be sustainable impact, that we need an ongoing program. And so BC was in person, and AD
AC.
AC, right? AC
DCAC.
DCAC, right?
Right, right.
It was a band, I think.
We're on
Yeah.
a highway
Yeah.
to access.
That's great. But it all has an organic evolution. And the roots actually go back to the late 70s when Norman Lear and Fern Field, who was a producer of his, and Lorene Arbus started the Media Access Awards. And that was quite by accident as well, because Fern was connected with the Governor's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities back in the day. And she said she wanted Norman to be a speaker. And his publicist says, are you giving him an award? And she said, absolutely. I forgot to mention that. Of course, we're giving him an award. So that was the accidental starting of the Media Access Awards. And then I had the honor of organizing the first Media Access Office, which was a liaison between the entertainment industry and disability community on casting, authentic casting, and script consultation and technical assistance, kind of what's called now accessibility coordinators. That was back in the day. And it's just been a blessing to see so many people now involved in the process. It's really great. A lot of creatives with disabilities out there taking back the narrative and naming and framing and claiming authentic representation. So, and working with Robin and Andrea with Lights Camera Access has just been a pleasure and an honor.
Right. I mean, because even in the disability rights space, we're not always afforded those opportunities to be our authentic selves. And it's just so interesting how that can play out at times. And I think we all, it sounds like, have had to deal with that to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Andrea, I didn't know you until we went AC or DC, however you want to do it or frame it. When I did lights camera access my first time a few years ago, and what was it like for you? Because now everything is virtual and it's easier to connect with people and really see the talents of people with disabilities in relation to the entertainment space.
That's a really good question, Blaze. And I was part of the BC. I did a couple of in-person events. So
You did.
I
You came
did.
to the TV Academy. You're absolutely right.
I did, and I did
But on the core team.
I did a couple of them, and I
Yeah.
just loved them. I saw Derek and Steven do their workshops. I fell in love with it. It was like, a lot of times they approach people with disabilities, and I hope I'm saying this word correctly, but with this infantilism type of tone, very condescending. And one thing I loved about, the Lights Camera Access team was that I felt like people were respecting me when they were talking to me. The workshops were challenging. They weren't, they were meeting us where we were at, but they were still challenging enough for us to develop career strategies. And then virtually, I loved it too. So we're not a monolith. We all have different disabilities. So when COVID came, it was a horrible thing. But one of the great things that came out of it is some access. So I love hybrid events. And I think that people with disabilities, they have a choice between, possibly showing up, in person. That could be better for some people. Cognitively, sometimes that's better for me. But sometimes sensory wise, it's better for me to be, working from home. So with what Terry and the team does, I think that I've watched so many people grow. I've watched so many people have opportunities. They're taking these skills with them. They're life skills. Some people just don't get that. So you get career skills mixed in with life skills. Because if you don't know how to apply the skills that you're taught, if people just drop you off, and they don't check back in with you, and you don't have a family that you can call, sometimes those skills are not really sustainable.
Right. You're absolutely right. And it could be either your blood family or a community of people that you've developed that you refer to as your family. And it's all this is just so accurate, Andrea. It really is. And it's just one of those things that it's just more important than ever, especially as we navigate the times that we are navigating, to support each other as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely.
Right. And I feel like our collective job of inclusion, accessibility, diversity is just has just become more difficult since 2025, when a certain repeat president, who I won't mention because I don't consider him to be my president, has come into the fold. I think we all can universally agree on that.
Amen.
And do you know, I don't know if you know this, Blaze, but I researched, there's a great documentary on PBS, and it talks about caregiving, but they go into the history of how we got Social Security disability. And I want to say it was really based on serving blind people first. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that.
No, I think you're right, because blind people who are receiving Social Security disability get more money than everybody else. And I have no problem saying that's just grossly unfair. And I apologize to any other blind person who feels differently about that. But we need to be, and I think this is something that all disability groups of their own kind struggle with, is looking at things through a fair, objective lens.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the premise there was because they felt that people needed more support if they were blind, but someone like myself that has a multitude of disabilities, I need support, and I could fare better with more support. So I absolutely agree with you. But what I found out in that documentary is that I wish I knew the name of it. I'll figure it out by the end. But that it makes sense. There's something called wraparound services, and it's usually
Mhm.
discussed in the world of when people are unhoused or
Mhm.
they have
Mhm.
substance abuse. But
Mhm.
I found out through that documentary that Social Security disability was never supposed to be a standalone. It was supposed to work coherently, collectively with other groups. So when they have this limit of how much you can make, that kind of defeats the purpose of that. But originally, everybody was supposed to work. And when I'm seeing that agencies are sometimes really great, but they're working in silo, also a lot of it is based on something that someone did to take advantage of the system. So everybody else has to kind of suffer
Yeah.
for that. And it's
Mhm.
inherently ableist because it requires us to, and it encourages people to stay inside. And many people are afraid that they're going to lose their benefits if they do something that's joyful. And studies have been shown that, music and going outside and getting your vitamin D and sunshine is very good for your health. So there's a lot of things that need to be reformed, in the system. And how that relates to this conversation is that, they don't think of entertainment as a viable career. And it can be, In fact, when I was able to get up and walk out of my wheelchair, when I finally was able to get up, because I always felt like I could, that's a whole nother conversation. But the physical therapist did not have enough time to work with me. But I was like, I feel this muscle. And they were like, we have caseloads and everything. So I go to the arts. Terry's gonna love this. I go to the arts and I started taking theater. I was always theatrically trained, but I started taking theater and movement for actors and voice acting. And they have their ratio from student to teacher was worse. It was like, like 1 to 50 or something, right? But they still came to me. The voice teacher, she said, "You use this muscle." And she would point to me. I mean, she would ask me
Yeah.
first because, we don't want people
Yeah.
to remember us. But, she said, "You use this muscle." Now imagine that, but my physical therapist wouldn't do that. They're just like, "Okay, you can't move that muscle. Bye. We gotta, deal with this insurance." So the arts usually is very welcoming and very patient, and it's very helpful for even rehabilitation when it comes to muscle memory or a
Yeah.
great way for recreation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the arts is, I mean, generally speaking, a pretty accessible space, and it back to the physical therapist, it just goes to show the attitudes that medical professionals, generally speaking, have toward people with disabilities. And I
Right.
said this on an earlier episode when I was talking with a friend of ours, Anita Cameron.
Yeah.
That 72% of medical professionals, that's according to a 2021 study from Harvard, say that they are uncomfortable treating people with disabilities. And
Really?
Yeah.
here we are in 2026. I'm
Yeah.
sure that number hasn't gone down a whole hell of a lot,
No, it hasn't.
but yeah, it's
And
still
that's
just so damn depressing.
well, I have to give a lot of credit to Karen McCullough in Chicago. She was one of the co-founders of NOD, National Organization of Nurses with Disabilities. And they blew up the idea, which is what the basis of the sector summit with Kathy Martinez was, is that people with disabilities, who better to understand and have empathy and not put a person in a medical box to be fixed or cured than people with disabilities. So, to Andrea's point, there are some physical therapists with disabilities that roll into a room of somebody who's, a newly injured person, and they think, "Wow, I could be that. Not at this moment, but there's life after disability," and the media just is so sabotaging of that concept, consciously and unconsciously. But you're absolutely right. So what we're all trying to do is break through that medical model so that people can tell their story, so that it's the writers and directors and editors and actors, and rather somebody else superimposing their assumptions about somebody, that people tell their own stories. And
Right.
it's slowly starting to make a difference, which is great.
Right. Well, Terry, you just teed me up perfectly. And just to sort of reset things, since we have a few voices on here, we've got Terry Hartman Squire, we've got Andrea Jennings and Robin Billups here on the show with me, Blaze Bryant. So this is for all of you. Since you got involved in the media, entertainment, and disability space and that intersectionality, how have you seen the needle move? Anyone?
Can I go?
Robin, it's been a while since
Yeah.
you've talked, Robin. I'll let you take that first.
That's Robin. Yeah.
As I was sharing earlier, when I signed on for this, I told Terry, I said, I truly believe in a pilot program, right? So we started this pilot program and we're in our third cohort now. But when we started the pilot program, the whole mission was to work through how we can effectively help folks hear, earn their voice, use their voice, and own their business, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times people are working in their business and not on their business. So one of the reasons why we did the pilot is so that we could actually ferret out how many folks should be in the class, what should we cover. I have a background in commercial real estate construction financing, and I also have a background in supplier diversity. I call it supply chain inclusion. And so, since 2006, I didn't know about supplier diversity. And when you look at how the pie is divided up so that certain buckets of folks can actually participate in the supply chain, there was this sliver around disability. It was a sliver. It was a sliver. I learned about disability and then I took my marketable skills and married that to this pilot and married it to this need in this particular community. And so, have I seen changes? I've seen some changes. I've seen people, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little rigid, and two of our constituents, one of them being blind, they said I was mean. They said I was this, and no, I can't do that. And then we had our one-on-ones. We actually do one-on-ones during the process. And when we did the one-on-ones, and I explained to them, when you're sitting across the table from someone negotiating an opportunity, when you're networking, these are the tools that you're going to need to use. And that person does not care that you have a disability. They may have some empathy if somebody in their family has a disability, but who's to say that they bring that to work, right? Who's to say that they bring that to their profession to have that empathy? And so, have I seen changes? Yes, those two young ladies knocked it out the park with their pitch. When we had our pitch contest, they knocked it out the park. And they were like, and then I get this big old long, wonderful email from them telling me, yeah, you started out mean, but now we understand. Now we understand why you pushed us, why you focused us. And I think that to me, there's two things that I try to attempt to do is to help people understand nobody has the time to hear the whole story. So answer to the call of the question and be strategic about everything that you do related to your business because business is strategy, right? And so, yeah, I've seen people grow their voice. I've seen people get organized in, I do 12, Talea does 12 different things, 20 different things. But what's the foundation of what your company is about? What is the foundation of what that is? That's what we want to focus on. And so, yeah, I've seen exceptional changes. And two, there have been a couple of people who didn't fit because they could not amend their ways. I don't believe in people changing. I believe you will amend the way you do things because you want to be engaged in the process. And so they change themselves because it starts with, let me amend my way, the way I do things so that I can be inclusive in how I engage with people, right? And subsequently, the change will come because now they've been, this is what I love about LCA. We've created, we've created this very safe space so people get a chance to evolve. And Blaze, Andrea, Terry has she has a spirit of discernment and a voice and a natural nurturing process. We've been in some tough spaces, but when she gets through, I step back and I'm like, go on, girl.
Yeah.
You handle that because that's not my lane. I'm getting there, but that's not my lane. I'm gonna let you handle that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Robin, I knew the first time I heard your voice when we started the cohort in early January, and here we are taping this mid-ish end of March.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the 20th. Yeah, it's still mid-March, right? Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I don't know, just a few days before baseball season. So that's sort of my time frame.
Go
right now.
Cardinals. Go Cardinals.
There you go. I'm in New York, and I root for the team with the pinstripes, with the interlocking NY Yankees. So, and I knew the first time I heard your voice, I said to myself, okay, Robin is one of my people because she's just tough love, direct, and I mean,
Real.
real. And as much as us disabled folks feel a need to tell our story, because frankly, we're not always heard. But the reality is people need to understand that not everyone has time for the whole story. And if you're working with someone who's helping you get on the path that you want to be on, you have to really put in the work. And the story is only going to get you so far.
Yeah. And Blaze, at the end of the day, everybody has a story, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Everybody has a story. And what we push is answer to the call of the question, which allows the person to say, tell me a little bit more about that. Now they've opened the door. But if you start out telling the whole story, they're glazing over and they're trying to figure out, how do I get up out of here? How do I get away from this person? Even if it's a great story, you have to remember time is money and money is time. And when you're in a business environment, they're looking for solutions.
Right.
They're not looking to hear your story. They're looking for a solution to a challenge, to a problem, to an opportunity. So they are looking for, are you a solution to the challenge that they have right now? Are you there to fill a gap?
Exactly. I mean, I remember just a few weeks ago, we have a new director of advocacy at work, and we were getting set to tape a TV interview, and we had 2 minutes less time than I initially thought we were going to have. So I just looked over at her, and she's a disabled person as well. I just said to her, speak in sound bites. I said, that's how we're going to get this across. And since I said that, I've said to myself, okay, that's a really good rule to live by.
Yes, it is. Yep. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Even though I've probably broken it 18 billion times here on the show.
Now, but it's your show.
Yeah,
it's your show.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true.
That's right.
And I tend to like to create the space for everybody else.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things. Now, Andrea, that same question to you of what progress or changes have you seen since you got into the space?
Well, first I want to lead off that I'm drinking something in a wine glass but it's actually palm juice. But you know what?
We're not
getting endorsement, so I'm gonna put this down.
I thought she was doing day drink. I thought she was doing day drinking already, Blaze.
I wouldn't have judged. Hey, it's 5:00 somewhere, and it's afternoon where I am.
That's why I need to I drink everything out of a wine glass. Yeah.
Yeah, but now the Palm is going to be a sponsor of Blaze's podcast.
Right.
Because product placement started here right now. Thanks, Andrea.
That's correct. And this will drop before Palm Sunday, which is in a little over a week. So. Wait, we're talking about different palms, aren't we?
Right. This is the pomegranate blueberry boost tea. So instead of but no, I love that question because I have, cognitive memory problems and things like that. And when I found out that all of the fighting that we all do collectively, now equity actors and I believe SAG actors do not have to be off book with their auditions anymore. Do you know how huge that is?
Yeah.
How many people can participate? They used to have to hold their slides, which would be very difficult for some people with disabilities.
Mhm.
They used to have to be off book on their audition, and they used to have to memorize it in a really short period of time. So now there's rules that you need at least 48 hours. You do not have to hold the slides anymore. And you don't have to be off book, which for people that don't understand, that means you just have to have everything memorized, no matter how long the script is. And you won't have to be penalized for looking at your script. But it's amazing to know that we lived in a world like this. And then you couple that along with I'm just naming one of the changes. I'm sure Terry could name some other changes that I know she's fought through and seen other pioneers fought through in the entertainment industry. But imagine just having a myriad of all that. There's so many changes that I do see. And I think more importantly, I think people like Terry and Robin are really important because if we don't know, and myself as well, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know where you've been, how can you know where you're going?
Yeah.
And Terry's really good at identifying to Robin's point, because somebody asked me about someone the other day, and I said, send them to Terry, and she'll tell you. She'll she'll let you know, and not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. Just mostly like, is this person a good fit for this?
Right.
Are they ready? She'll either get them ready, give them the tools, give them the skills, but she's not this person that's going to put somebody out there. And sometimes we have this big heart and we see someone trying, we want to push them out there, and it can actually be harmful if it's not the right time. And also Robin brings this myriad, this she's like a liaison where she knows enough of things in the corporate space and the government space. She is understanding disability now. So now she can advocate for us and say, I like to say to people, don't let your story be your identity. And a lot of people don't realize
Yes.
different things. If they don't have that story, and some of it is woe is me, they don't know what to do. They don't even know how to have a conversation without that one talking point.
Yeah.
And so you could take my story away from me, and it took many years, but I could still survive. So yeah.
I love that. It's so true.
It is true. Andrea is very humble, and she is also one of the founding members of RAMPT, which is Recording Artists and Music Professionals with Disabilities. And you and colleagues have done a tremendous job in opening up that whole area of entertainment. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. I think what unites us is the anger that we have and using it. I mean, my mom was a single parent mom. She didn't have time for nothing. So she would find a way to help us through really tough times. And if I was sad, to Andrea's point, she would say something that would make me angry, and she'd say, good, you found your anger, now use it. And she meant to organize, to get out of the space that it was just about me, and how you could use that negative experience or sad experience or unfair experience and make the path clear for other people coming behind you. And that's the thing that unites us with LCA. All of us believe that, and no one's taken away your origin story. But how do you use it to frame it to move forward? And if you're not ready to move forward, that's okay. You find your time, find your process. And we have been blessed with 5 graduate students in vocational rehabilitation that form the career development team. And they work at such an amazing, wonderful, granular level to help people, not only with resume review, that's just the metaphor, but what's in the resume? Who are you as a person? How do you project your essence? You may not have gotten paid to volunteer at the church or the thrift shop or the homeless shelter, but that's really who your essence is. And let's find a way for that to shine. So that's dovetails beautifully with what Robin's talking about as well with the media entrepreneur cohort. So together we are connected in so many ways, and we are family by choice. We believe that all of us have a true north. It may be a different true north, but we all are in our integrity. And I think that's what differentiates us, and then we're able to pass that forward with the expectation that people are going to pay it forward.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. It really is a family, LCA is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm just so lucky to have been and continue to be a part of it. And I just,
Um,
10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought something like this existed. And
Yeah.
it came into my life, LCA came into my life at a perfect time. And
Yeah.
I'm just so grateful for all of the amazing work that you do. And I couldn't think of a better way to wrap this up on such an inspirational note that you just gave, Terry. So,
Aw.
It's
with,
Terry.
yeah, with,
No, you're here. You're part of that. You're part of that mosaic. We weave and braid everybody together, and you're a very important part of that. And you invited us back. That's really cool to be on your podcast.
absolutely. Well, this is something that I've wanted to do for a while. And I finally said to myself, what the heck? Just send the email.
Yeah.
Hey, that's right.
Well, I'm just so glad. I know we've got some time constraints and we're up against them. So with that, Terry Hartman Squire, Robin Billups, Andrea Jennings, this has just been a real treat. And thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and everything that you do to make the world a more inclusive, accessible place.
Amen.
Perfect.
Thank you
for having
Blaze. You
us.
too.
The Blazin' Access podcast is a Blazin' Shows production and is not affiliated with any disability rights organization. The views expressed here on the show are solely those of the host and the guest. The show is hosted and produced by me, Blaze Bryant. The music you heard on today's show is by Andre Lewis, who is blind. What did you think about this episode? Let me know on Facebook at Blazin' Shows. That's BLAISIN Shows. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe, share, and support the show if you can on our website at blazinshows.com. Transcripts are automatically generated and are not perfect, but they will give you a baseline sense as to what was said here on the show. Tune in next time for another great episode of the Blazin' Access podcast, amplifying disability perspective one story at a time. Have a great day.